Whether you like sports or not, we're all armchair quarterbacks and coaches. How many like sports? How many are enthusiasts of sports? Raise your hands. Okay, listen to me for a minute, you people that are not interested in sports. Because I have a message to give about what I've learned in sports. Thursday night, I was privileged to say a mass for the University of Nevada's football team and coaches. It's difficult, because they were going to play San Diego State. And, of course, I support San Diego State, being here. But anyway, I said mass for them, and I told them right off the bat that I wasn't really praying for them. But I said I'd let God's will be done. And I asked the question of one of the head coach. In fact, I asked him, I said, do you have a game plan for today or tomorrow? He said, of course. I said, how many hours did you spend making that game plan? He said, about 3 and 4 days. And we thought about it for a whole week. So I said, do you think it's a good game plan? He said, yes. And I said, I hope it's not. But I'll pray for you anyway, that you're successful according to your relationship with God. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But I'm glad to know you have a game plan, because it's so important. Because so many times when I watch games, I don't care if it's baseball or football, I criticize the game plan, especially with the Chargers in the fourth quarter of a game. How do you know I'm laughing about him? He knows when to laugh, that kid. I'll pay you afterwards with a donut. But, it's interesting. The game plan theme can work into life because all of us have a game plan for others. When you watch the news, for example, isn't it interesting how you can have a game plan for the government, right now especially, that they should get this thing solved and what we're going through with the shutdown? We have a game plan because we think we know what should be. We don't always say it, but we certainly think it. We have a game plan when it comes to our employers. If you're an employee, you know what they should do, we know what they could do, we know what they must do, and yet we know what they don't do. So we have that with employers. We have it with our families. Our kids, if you have a parent, if your parents, our parents, if your kids, you have a game plan that you think should be followed. And when they don't, it's very much critical on your part. You think worse thoughts about why they're so maladjusted, why they're not doing the right things. Because if you were in charge, you'd know just exactly what to do. It's amazing how we get locked into this idea of game plan for others. And we forget about what it should be for ourselves. Very interesting, because we even get to the point where we criticize others to the point of even criticizing God. Because we wonder what his game plan is. We pray, sometimes we don't get answers. We believe, sometimes we don't know where God is. It's very interesting because I read a review of a book this past week. It's kind of irreverent, the title. The title is, Where the Hell is God? It kind of made me cringe when I read the title. Seems so disrespectful and not very spiritual. But the book has a point, because it's something that in our minds and hearts we question about God. Where are you, God? Where are you in life? How come there's so much terrorism? How come you can't solve the wars? How come there's so many abortions in this country? And this is Respect Life Day. Over 1 million in this country are aborted every year. How come, Lord, there's so much sexual abuse in all facets of society? How come, God, does it seem that the elderly and the dying are abandoned? How come, God? We ask the question. We don't always verbalize it because we're a little hesitant to do that. It's kind of like, I don't want to be threatened with lightning. I don't want the roof to cave in on me. But we still do it with God, just like we do it across the board with everybody else. We wonder, what is the game plan? And we put it before God. It's very interesting today because in the Old Testament, there aren't many examples of someone being critical of God or challenging God. Jeremiah does it. Ezekiel does it sometimes. But Habakkuk today, who lived 6 centuries before Jesus Christ, put it very clearly, didn't he? Let me read it for you again, in case you didn't get it the first time. Lord, how long? I cry to you, Lord, for help, but you don't listen. I cry out violence, but you don't intervene. Why do you let me see ruin? Why must I look at misery? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and clamorous discord. Why, Lord? How come you're not solving these problems? The Lord responds. He answered and said, write down the vision clearly upon the tablets so that one can read it readily. And the vision is this, that there still has its time that presses on fulfillment and will not disappoint. If it delays, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not be late. Integrity is mine. Faith is yours. Interesting, isn't it? God responds to Habakkuk by saying, be patient, wait it out. Don't think I've abandoned you, I haven't. I will not do that kind of thing to you at all. So what do we do with this? In the gospel, it carries a message clear because Jesus puts it in words like this. And the apostles said, increase our faith, which we're talking about here. How do we have faith in all these difficult things we go through in life? What would be our game plan of faith? You know, here the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. And the Lord says, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, and you would say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. He exaggerates that completely by an example by saying, if your faith is really small, don't worry. I will not abandon you. I'm going to be there. Don't give up. Don't stop trying. Have a game plan for yourself to remember that I will never, ever abandon you. You might leave me, but I won't abandon you. That's what he says. That's what God says. So when we start questioning God like Habakkuk did and how we do it, sometimes thinking, let's end all this turmoil of the world, let's remember it's going to depend something about us doing something with it, with the faith we have. In the small way that we touch the world, we've got to use the faith to make the changes. It isn't God's fault that all of this is happening, it's ours. We're the one causing this. So what do? Pope Francis, you know how impressive he is these days with everyone. He's touching the world. Probably because he's got the pulse on what to do with this faith thing. And it's a reminder for us, because I think he's a man of all reasons and seasons right now. And I think God's working very directly through him to us about how to have a game plan in your faith level, how to put it into practice in what you're about, how not to be negative and pessimistic about the world and all it's offering us at this time. But a game plan includes us doing something about it in our own little individual ways. He says, simply, in the summary of what I've read recently, he says, practice justice. That means you got to start inside. Justice for other people. That's not easy to practice because it's going to include forgiveness and mercy, and that isn't easy to offer. He says, support value of human life. This is very important in this Respect Life Sunday. How do we respect human life? What do we do about that? Do we ever rise up to pray for those that are going to make decisions about birth? Do we ever come forward and say, okay, I'm going to stand with those that are against abortion? Have we ever thought about maybe being there, abortion clinics, with those that pray for the end of abortions? Last night I went to the big gala that was pro-life at the Rancho Bernardo Inn, supporting what they do in Gulf, a very important service with doctors and nurses to take care of those that help guide those that are going to have children, and that they wouldn't abort them, but they'd give birth. And I was there last night with about 500 people. And all I could think about is, what a way to support the value of life. A lot of people out there working at it. Maybe we could do more. Maybe I could do more. Maybe you could do more. Especially in prayer. Remember the intentions of those that strive after life, not death. So Pope Francis mentions that. He also goes on with a third one. He says, reach out and help those in need, the poor. Now, who are the poor? Every one of us know poor among us. It isn't just the people that have no food, although it certainly includes them, serving people that are in need in that respect, the starving, the poorest of the poor. But it's also poor the people that just are struggling in life, and that you and I can be encouraging people with others. Encourage them. Get out of self sometimes. You know, we think we're so bad off sometimes, each one of us. How about looking out and seeing somebody else that's worse off, or maybe equally bad off, or just bad off? By a smile, an encouragement, reaching out, a phone call, a letter, a welcome, a good morning. How are you? And mean it. Those are poor people there that we could recognize that are in our midst. We should be doing that. And fourthly, he says, discover the good in others. It's very important with Pope Francis. Discover the good. How many of us know about the bad in others and recognize it? How many of us just pick out things that are terrible about another person? How many of us just look at others and criticize them because they don't do what we do, or think like we think, or dress like we dress, or act like we act? We're very critical people. That's where the armchair leaders, where we're just critical. Pope Francis says, discover the good in others. Anyone, even if they're different. So, I think that the call today about a game plan spiritually is one that we need to make up here today, maybe tomorrow. When you go home today, think about, what's your game plan in spiritual life? What is it? Is it just criticism of God and others? Maybe. Is it the fact that God doesn't seem to be doing his work? Is it because others don't measure up? Or is the game plan spreading goodness by our efforts to reach out and do something? Do something, not just sit there. It's a big challenge. Habakkuk got the answer by saying, I'm faithful to you, don't give up on me. Jesus tells the apostles, reach out because I'm going to help you out no matter what your faith seems to be, even if it's small. And I think God says the same thing to us. Get with it. Do something. Then you're going to know you got a good game plan. Let's stand and pray. Let's stand and pray. Let's stand and pray. Let's stand and pray.